Hello everyone, my name is Myra. Welcome to another video. So it is the end of the month, which means it's time for another wrap up. Now, let me say the month of May was actually a pretty decent reading month for me. I read a total of 8 books, which again, decent for me, especially considering that with like Mother's Day and like other family things that I had going on, I really wasn't doing as much reading, but audiobooks really came in clutch for me this month. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pull up my Goodreads here on my iPad and just kind of go in order based on the books that I read. Now I'm gonna try to do this as fast as I can because the sun and the light is not on my side. The sun is starting to set here in California and today's the only day that I can film. The very first book that I read in the month of May was The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas. So this was actually the very first Elena Armas book, and I gotta say, I thought it was okay. This was like a 2.5 to 3 star read at most, simply because, I don't know, there was some things in it that I felt were like missing for me. So one thing that you need to know about me is I do not like insta love. Insta love is like a huge turn off for me when it comes to a romance book. I cannot have insta love. And this one, you have this girl who she goes to stay over at her friend's apartment because her friend is off at her honeymoon, and she thinks that someone is breaking into the apartment, but she ends up finding out that it's her best friend's cousin who is visiting from Spain, and he is there just to basically be there for a couple of months and then he's gonna go back. She didn't know she was gonna be there, she doesn't know he was gonna come by, but it turns out that she's had this crush on him for a very long time. In fact, when her best friend got married, she was secretly hoping that she was going to meet him and maybe they were gonna hit it off, and so she had done a lot of like social media stalking and she already was like infatuated with this guy, right? And so when she ends up obviously recognizing him from like her Instagram stalking, she's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like I just accused him of like trying to break in, blah, blah, blah. And he ends up finding out that she's staying there because there's like some issues at her apartment. And he tells her, hey, I'm gonna stay here too. I don't mind sharing the space with you. We can spend some time together. The heroine is a romance author and she's kind of hitting a writer's block. And she finds that the reason why is because she hasn't been on a date in a while. She doesn't feel inspired. They start to pretend to date. So like when they're at home, they're gonna be roommates, but outside they're gonna be like dating each other. And he's basically gonna try to like romance her to help her with her writer's block. That was sweet and nice enough, and I liked the friendship, but I don't know, the romance, it just felt like something was missing. And also, I did listen to this on audio, and I think the narrator that was like for him, it just wasn't working for me because he was talking very like low and slow, and I listen to books at like 1.75 speed, which is pretty fast. Like it's pretty fast for me. My boyfriend has like overheard it. He's like, oh my gosh, why are they talking that fast? And it works for me, and the female narrator was fine, but for some reason with his, it didn't work for me. And I don't know, maybe it would have been different if I would have just read the book, but the audio just was not it for me. So sadly, this one didn't do so well, but I'm gonna try to check out other Elena Armas books and hopefully those will actually work out for me. Now, the next book that I read was Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood, and I really enjoyed this book. I am going through like this weird thing right now where I thought I was kind of out of my YA phase. I definitely started as a YA reader, but now, I don't know, there's a few YA books that I've been reading and been exposed to that are really working for me, and Check and Mate was one of them. So in this book, you have this heroine who has this love and passion for chess, and you don't know why, but something happened that basically causes her to not pursue chess and not be interested in chess anymore. The start of the story, you don't really know what it is, and you do end up finding out later on in the book what it was that caused her to basically, leave something that she was so passionate about behind. She ends up getting dragged into this tournament with her best friend, and she ends up doing really well, and she gets the attention of this woman who basically offers her a job working for her. And literally her job would be to be competing in these chess tournaments. Now, of course, she does have like duties and responsibilities that she has to do, but ultimately, depending on her placement on these tournaments, she would be making a lot of really good money. Now, of course, she at first tells her, no, there's no way, I'm not interested. Chess was like something that I used to do for fun. I don't want to do it anymore. But some things go down, and because she is with just her mom and her two sisters, she decides, you know what, I need the money, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take this job offer. She was so passionate about chess, and now being in that environment, it's making it really hard for her to like pretend to not care. And the way that the book, like, and Ali Hazelwood really talked about chess and the chess world, it made me want to go play chess. Like, I don't know if you guys have watched that show. I think it's called The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. I actually started it and I never continued it, but it was so good. And this kind of had a similar thing for me. And it was through audio, but I can really see like her playing chess and her being in these tournaments. And of course, it is a YA romance, so she does end up actually defeating the #1 player in the world, and that is like a huge deal. She of course doesn't, well, she did know that he was the #1, but she didn't realize that she was gonna like beat him. But she ends up beating him, and it's like this big deal. And of course, he is also like attracted to her, and they're having all these run-ins now at the tournament. It is YA, there is romance, and there is romance between obviously her and now this guy who's like the #1 player in the world, but now she basically has to try to beat him. So it's really interesting. It was a really fun read, and I definitely highly recommend it. Solid 4.5 star for me. And she did a great job, so I enjoyed it. Definitely recommend it if you haven't. And I listened to it on audio and I loved it, so the audio is really, really good. The next book that I read was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Abby Jimenez is another author that, this is only the second book that I've read by her, but I really like her writing, and I especially really like the representation that she has in her books. I did rate this book a 4.25. I couldn't rate it a full 5 star because I just felt like the romance wasn't like all consuming for me to be like, oh my gosh, like this is so epic. But I will say it was a lot more realistic. The hero and the heroine meet because on a Reddit thread, he ends up talking about the fact that any girl that he breaks up with, they immediately go on to date the person that ends up becoming their soulmate and the love of their life. And he is kind of over it because he wants to have his own happily ever after. And it turns out that she actually has the exact same problem. And so they come up with this plan of, hey, what if we date each other and it'll cancel out and then we'll be all good, like we'll be fine. And so they end up working that out, and they end up saying, okay, we're gonna like intentionally date, and we're gonna do everything that we normally do in our other relationships, and then once we break up, we should be able to meet the love of our life. Now, of course, it is a romance, and as they're pretending to date each other, they also really start having, you know, real feelings about each other. They really start to enjoy spending time with each other, but they both have their issues. She definitely has like abandonment issues and trust issues because she didn't have the best home growing up. She has never met her dad, and her mom basically said, I have no family, it's just me. But her mom was also very aloof and did not care for her. In fact, she even got placed into the foster system briefly because her mom left her alone when she was 8 years old for like 3 days, and you don't do that. Like, this is a child. And so she basically grew up with her best friend, and her best friend is very like loving and protective of her, but of course her weak spot is still her mom. And so every time that her mom kind of comes in the picture, it's always like a path of destruction that follows. As the story goes on, it does get pretty heavy, so I will definitely say check your triggers because it was really good representation, but it's very realistic. And her mom really does suffer from a lot of like trauma and things that she's been through, and she definitely needs professional help. She recognizes that her mom needs professional help, but she also knows that unless her mom willingly gets the help, it's just not gonna happen. And you really get to see these episodes that this mom comes like in. You get to see how she also has kind of, you know, put on rose-colored glasses when it comes to her mom, and she kind of really makes excuses for her mom, and it's things that are just, and behaviors that are not okay, but also she does need help. So you really are like conflicted, and you do get to see her conflict, because on one hand you're like, wow, the mom is horrible, she's treating her so bad, but on the other hand you're like, her mom needs help. So you do get to see that. And of course they both get, you know, they have their own issues and their own insecurities, and he's going through his own issues with his mom and his family, and him having to step up and, you know, basically take on a role that he didn't want to take on. And it made it very realistic, and it gives you these two people who have, you know, these wishes and these things that they want for themselves, but also all these things that life is throwing at them that they're trying to deal with. So again, it was a heavier book, but a really good book. So I recommend it if you haven't read it. Just for the summer, read it this summer. There you go. Next, I ended up reading The One I Left Behind by Piper Rain. So in this one, you definitely need to grab your cowboy boots, because we are going to the ranch. So in this one, you have your typical small town, boy meets girl, boy loves girl, but then boy leaves girl. And the reason why Ben leaves is because he goes on to become a professional football player. And now that it's been 14 years, he's played in the NFL, he's retired, he is moving back to his small town. Now he's still not really sure if he wants to stay there, if he wants to like do something else, but for now he ends up moving back to his small town. And who is there than none other than his high school sweetheart Jillian, who basically had her heart completely shattered and broken when they inevitably broke up and went their separate ways when he became a professional football player. Now that he's back though, his old football coach ends up needing his help coaching the football team, and one of the players on this football team is Jillian's son. Now this is not going to be, he's not Ben's son, and it's not a spoiler, I'm just telling you because I know, like for me too, I'm like, oh, there's probably gonna be some twist, and I'm already like over it, but no, it actually is not his son. And I actually found that refreshing, that it genuinely is not his son. It's not like a secret baby type of thing. But when he starts coaching this team, obviously the boy, he's 14, and he knows that he broke his mom's heart, and so he's like, yes, okay, I guess I'll respect you, but also like, you broke my mom's heart. And I will say, one of the things that I really liked about this book was the relationship that Ben had with his dad, because his dad, obviously he's older, and like, yeah, Ben is 34, but his dad is like, listen, you, like, I've been around the block more than you, so you need to listen to some of my advice. Like, these are certain things that you need to do if you really want another shot with Jillian. And with Jillian and her son, she's a single mom of a 14-year-old boy, and they have this like honesty policy where it's like, no matter what, we're going to be honest with each other, and it might not be what we each want to hear, but we're going to be respectfully honest with each other. And so that dynamic that they had with like both like mother and child and like son and dad, I really liked. And of course, Ben and Jillian are trying to reconnect. She doesn't really want anything to do with him because again, he broke her heart, but he still wants her back. So there is some groveling, and it wasn't a full 5-star read for me just because I wanted a little bit more groveling, especially when it's my second chance romance, because I do think that sometimes a second chance romance can feel a little insta-lovey, depending on how the author gives you their backstory and lets you know like why they were in love, why they're not together, and why they still belong together, if that makes sense. Now, on a similar train, I actually ended up reading another book that was very, very similar to this one, and it was Unstoppable Love by Stacey Lynn. This one was another small town football romance, but in this one, you have the hero and heroine who have never dated, okay? He has always been attracted to her, especially when they were teenagers, but she is off limits because he is his best friend's younger sister. And she has always had a crush on him because, you know, he's the best, like he's her brother's best friend, and he is like the football hotshot, and he does go on to play professional football, and that's why they haven't really connected with each other. But in this case, it's only been a couple of years. Now, again, they've never dated, so it's not a second chance per se, but he has always wanted her, but they don't know that they've each wanted each other. So yeah, in this one, it's a lot of groveling. Again, small town, and you do have these two trying to figure out like, okay, wait, now that I'm single, and also like now you're back, but like I want you. And they do actually have a history that no one knows about, and she resents him for it and hates him for it, but no one knows why. So you do have a little bit of like a plot twist there, and you do have some hurt feelings there that are explored in this book. So if small town and football is your thing, definitely check either one of these books out because they will give you that vibe. Next, I ended up reading The Bromance Book Club by Liza K. Adams. And let me tell you, I really like this book. So I listened to this book on the Libby app. You have a married couple. He is a professional baseball player, and his wife ends up basically opening up to him about the fact that she's been faking it in their adult activities for a while. And of course, he's humiliated, but he doesn't react in the best way, and that causes her to get really angry with him. She kicks him out, and he actually ends up moving out. And so she ends up telling him, you know what, I want a divorce. And that's when he realizes, wait, what? Like, no, I don't want us to separate. Like, I want us to try to work on things. And she's like, no, like, look at how you reacted. Like, this was so immature. And now he's trying to win her back. One of his friends ends up telling him about this book club, and at first he thinks that they're messing with him, but he ends up finding out that this group of rich and like powerful men, these are men that are either like CEOs, or they play professional hockey or baseball or like other sports. They actually read romance books, and the reason why is because they have found that using some of the tips in these books have helped them understand their spouses, prevent a lot of problems in their relationships and in their marriages. Now again, he thinks that they're joking, he doesn't take them seriously, but they tell them, no dude, like trust me, this has helped us so much. And so he ends up reading into this book, and these guys are basically coaching him to try to help him not lose his wife. And I just thought it was so sweet. Is it realistic that a guy, or like that guys are really gonna get together and have a romance book club to try to do that? Maybe not, but honestly, not a bad idea. So listen, if you're out there and you're watching this, maybe start a guys bromance book club, and it might help you out in your relationships. I'm just saying. After listening to that one, I ended up finding out that there's more books in this series, so I went on to listen to book number 2, which was also on the Libby app, and this one is Undercover Bromance. So it does actually follow one of the other guys who's in the very first book, and he is this CEO and like restaurateur. He actually ends up being really attracted to the heroine from the first book, to her sister. He is this very attractive guy, and she is the only person that has ever like turned him down and not been attracted to him, and actually, if anything, very clearly disliked him. And he is intrigued by it, but he's like, whatever, not thinking much of it. In the meantime though, he actually is a huge softie. He's one of the only ones in this bromance book club that doesn't have a spouse or like a serious girlfriend, and he wants that. He actually really wants a wife and kids and commitment, and he is dating this woman, and they're at this restaurant, and it ends up being that this is the restaurant where the heroine from the first book, where her sister is a pastry chef at, and it's this very high-end, very popular restaurant where actually is this famous guy who like owns it and is like the face of this company, and he ends up ordering this very extravagant $1,000 cupcake, and it's like part of it that the person has to come and present it. So she comes, she presents it, and that's when he finds out that she works there, and he wants to take a picture with her as like a, hey, you know what, like we're getting the cupcake, it's a big deal, blah blah blah. And she accidentally drops it on his date's lap. Now his date is totally fine with it. She's like, hey, you know what, it's okay, it's an accident, don't worry about it. But unfortunately, her boss, who is a freaking jerk, fires her. So he ends up firing her. Now, not necessarily because of that. She actually ends up walking in on her boss being a disgusting pig with one of the women, one of the hostesses that works there at the restaurant, and he ends up firing her on the spot. She can't say anything about it because she did sign an NDA, and he also tells her like that he's going to make sure that she does not get hired in the industry, that he's going to basically like blacklist her so that she can't get another job at a restaurant. So she's trying to get another job, and unfortunately it's working. People are not hiring her, and he ends up feeling really bad that she got fired, and offers her a job or to work for him, and she's like, no thank you, no thank you. But he ends up finding out that there is something that went down that she's trying to uncover and expose her old boss for, and he basically volunteers to help her out. So they're both going to try to take him down, but they have to be very careful about how they do it, because again, she did sign an NDA, and they need proof because he's a very popular, famous figure, and now unfortunately it's really coming in the way of her and her business. She ends up agreeing to take his help, even though she doesn't really want to, but she's like, well, whatever, I guess I will. And they're basically spending all this time together trying to take him down. But as they're spending time together, she starts to see this other side of him, and he sees this other side of her, and he was already attracted to her. So the romance just kind of goes from there. But I just thought it was so sweet, and he is like such a like big teddy bear. He's kind of tired of women only wanting him for like his looks but not wanting anything serious, and so he actually wants that for a change. And she's kind of like, I don't know, because she has daddy issues, and she's like, I don't know if I can trust you. And yeah, there's this whole thing. But I really like this book, and I'm gonna be reading the rest of the books in this series. Now, the next book that I read, let me just tell you, this book, if I would have ripped my heart out of my chest and just like tossed it, it would have hurt a lot less than reading this book. So the book that I read and the book that I'm talking about is Powerful by Lauren Roberts. Now, if you haven't read Powerless, that's book 1 by Lauren Roberts, and it is a fantasy romance. So Powerful is actually a novella that follows the heroine from the first book's best friend, and basically like a little bit of like her background and her story. I don't want to go too much into details because I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't read the first book, but you are meant to read Powerless, then Powerful, and then later on the next book that's coming out is Reckless. But I knew going in that it was gonna hurt. I don't think I realized just how bad it was gonna hurt, because it hurt really bad. And I can't really tell you about it. All I can tell you is that it really goes on, like it really goes into details about her, you know, her background, and also as the events from the first book are happening, you're finding out where she was this whole time, because of course she's not the main character in the first book, and so you kind of get to see, oh, like as this was going on over here, this is where she was at and what was going on with her. So just be warned, if you have read the first book, have some tissues ready, maybe have someone available to give you like a big hug afterwards, because yeah, the story hurt. Last but not least, I read The Mad King and the False Queen by Hope and Amanda Abram, and I really liked it. Again, this was a YA fantasy romance, but it was done in like a completely different way than at least I've read it before. So this is a dual POV book, but you have these two heroines. They're not together, actually. They each have like their respective heroes that I think they might end up with, they might not end up with. I have no idea, because for the first book ended on a cliffhanger and you still don't have all the answers. And there's so many things going on that you're kind of like, wait, what's happening? So basically in this kingdom, you have assassins and you have royals, and these royals all have powers. Now, these powers that they have do get basically passed on, and eventually only one member of the family ends up having the powers, and then as like other children are born, they have to kind of compete, and only one of them keeps the powers, and so on and so forth. I'm gonna tell you right now, before it was even at 100 pages, I thought the story was going somewhere, and it definitely took a 360. Like, I was like, oh, never mind. There goes that theory, because I was way off. Some events go down and the princess of this kingdom ends up getting an offer from this mad king to potentially arrange a marriage between each other to benefit each of their kingdoms. And in the meantime, though, she also just developed her powers, and so she's trying to get some help with them, but for that she has to go to a totally different kingdom. And so she ends up coming up with this idea of basically swapping places with the assassin that is assigned to protect her, because they do have some similarities in appearance, and because he hasn't seen her since she was a child, she figures, well, the last time that we saw each other we were children, so it'll be believable enough if she goes in my place. And so they end up swapping places without anyone knowing, and the assassin ends up going to pretend to be the princess and meet this mad king that she's supposed to marry, but really she's gonna be there to try to find out if he is behind some of the murders that have taken place. And the princess ends up going to pretend to just be a regular person, but to get assistance from this other kingdom so that she can kind of develop and learn how to control her powers. And as the story goes on, you will be confused. You will not have all the answers, because you are getting the POVs from these two heroines, and as they're finding things out, you are also finding things out. And there's all this mystery, and there's this whole thing going on that you're kind of like, wait, who is bad and who is good? Because you don't really know whose side to be on. And of course, the assassin that's pretending to be the princess, she's supposed to marry this mad king, but she's not really planning on going through with it. But there are some things that are happening that she's thinking, oh my gosh, like there's actually more to him. Like, I'm actually kind of intrigued and attracted to him, but even if I were to marry him, I'm not the real princess. Like, I'm not really gonna be the one that's gonna marry him. It would be her, the princess. But in the meantime, the princess, she's over here on this quest trying to get assistance with her powers, and she's meeting this boy who's just like a regular person, and she's starting to really, you know, have this connection to him. And so again, it ends on a cliffhanger and you do not have all the answers, but this book is on Kindle Unlimited, so I definitely recommend for you to check it out. It's definitely very low spice. If anything, it's like a 0.5, and that's only because there might or might not be a little bit of kissing, you know, and things here and there. Now, I actually currently am in the middle of a couple of other books, one of them being Saving Six by Chloe Walsh, but I'll talk about that in June. Joey, just, I want to go in there and just give him a big hug, because that boy is going through it. He is going through it, and I knew from reading Binding and Keeping 13, but now that I'm getting his story, I'm just like, somebody give him a hug. Like, can I give him a hug? I don't know. I feel bad. But anyway, it was a really heavy book, but I'll talk about it more next month. But with all that said, these were the books that I read this month. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you've read any of these books and if we had similar reviews, please let me know, because I'm really curious. Let me know what books that you read this month that you think I should check out next month because you really like them. But yeah, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.